It's July 15th, 2023, and I'm Sergeant Sarah Ashton Cirillo of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, coming to you live and unscripted from the Territorial Defense Forces Media Studios in Kyiv. We are on YouTube, hello everyone, and Twitter, and we are bringing you today's news from Ukraine, everything about the armed forces and civilian society that you need to know. And we're going to begin with wishing Julia Davis, a huge supporter of Ukraine and the truth, a happy anniversary. Today marks the day that 9 years ago today, that Russia Today and Simeon apologized to our very own Julia Davis for making a mistake with her coverage and admitting that Julia Davis is all about the truth. So Julia, happy anniversary. We are going to go to Crimea. And what General Zaluzhny, our Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, told the Washington Post. He said, quote, "As soon as I have the means, no one will stop me from going to Crimea." And as a former member of the Crimean Tatar Battalion, the A4643, I can tell you that all of us in ZSU are prepared to go to Crimea as soon as General Zaluzhny gives the order. And speaking of going to Crimea, what we also know is that we are having a tremendous amount of success on the front lines, despite being outgunned, out-equipped, and having far less troops than the Russian enemies. Over the last day, we have flown 14 successful Air Force sorties, and in the Tavria direction, killed more than a company of men. We are approaching 10 companies of Russian soldiers dead in the Tavria direction over just the last 2 weeks. And so ultimately, what have the Russians needed to do? They announced today that 147,000 more Russian soldiers were conscripted. What that means is Putin is sending 147,000 more Russians to their potential death. In their conscription paperwork, they promised to train them, these young men and some women, on the most modern of Russian equipment. What that means is that they're learning how to operate equipment from the 1930s and 40s. However, we are aware that that stuff still kills. Going further down, excuse me, because as I said, it's unscripted, we also have reports that the Wagner terrorists have started to arrive en masse from Belarus, or into Belarus, traveling with license plates from the so-called Luhansk People's Republic and Donetsk People's Republic. More than 60 vehicles carrying hundreds of Wagner mercenaries arrived this morning in Belarus, according to Belarusian opposition groups. However, we're aware of what's happening, and as what President Zelensky announced from the Stavka meeting of the Ukrainian Armed Forces High Command yesterday, we are no longer facing a threat from the Belarusian border. Wagner PMC has been made impotent by the mass success we've had against them, including destroying more than 20,000 of them and injuring more than 80,000. This coming from President Zelensky himself. Speaking of situations with troops and going into battle, Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar had a meeting with the Prime Minister of Ukraine yesterday, Denis Shmyhal, and they were working on the need to advance psychiatric and psychological rehabilitation for the hundreds of thousands of soldiers who are defending liberty and liberation throughout Ukraine. The armed forces were not prepared to have to jump to more than 700,000 members, but it's good to know, and as I always say, trust the ZSU, it's good to know that Deputy Defense Minister Maliar is leading the way in making certain that our troops are getting the help that they need, both during and post-victory, during our fighting and post-victory. And it's when we have civilian leadership like this, as well as our command that is aware of these issues with PTSD, with the trauma that does come with our advancing battles and the counteroffensive that's underway, we can rest easy in realizing we won't be forgotten. So thank you, Deputy Defense Minister Maliar. and all of our commanders for being aware of this. Again, we are not scripted, so let me see my notes. 147,000 troops. Oh, here we go. Russia is complaining about the media treatment they receive. That is unfair. Well, Russia, stop invading sovereign nations, stop committing war crimes, stop engaging in terrorism, and maybe the media won't treat you so badly. Russia, we know you hate the truth, but that's okay, because you can hate whatever you want. We're inflicting a transformative defeat upon you, and as such, you will soon learn to accept what is reality and what is the lies that the Russian Federation is known for basking in. So we have 60 vehicle convoy from Belarus, which we already touched on. Really interesting news. SLB, the world's largest producer and supplier of oil machines and oil manufacturing technology, has announced that they are pulling out of the Russian market. This comes on the heels of more than 80% of respondents in 24 countries who told the Pew Research Group that they have a negative view of the Russian Federation. Again, the lies that are coming from Russian propagandists that support for Ukraine and against Russia is breaking just isn't backed up by facts. I'm laughing over the next numbers I'm about to give you. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced that hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian youth have died in this war. The only number that has seen hundreds of thousands of anyone die in this war is the nearly 250,000 Russian troops who have been liquidated by the armed forces of Ukraine. Ukrainian youth are in fact underrepresented when it comes to serving in the armed forces of Ukraine. Students who are in universities, students who are working in technology fields, young people who are taking care of their children, taking care of their parents, are not being mobilized. It's, again, Russian propaganda. This is not a young person's war. This is a war being fought by a cross-section of Ukrainian society. And it's why when RFK Jr. states that hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian youth have perished, it's simply not true. More Russian propaganda, more lies. We are finally going to look at something that has been talked about quite a bit since the NATO summit. Ben Wallace, the Minister of Defense of the United Kingdom, had made some comments about gratitude. And I want to read you this quote from a Ukrainian citizen who lives in Bucha and who lived in Bucha when the full-scale invasion took place. He stated, I want to read this quote directly. Ukrainians are defending not only themselves, Ukrainians are defending the West and all that the West stands for, including Western values. I won't get into what gratitude means. What I will say is that over 45,000 Ukrainian troops have fought in dozens of countries on behalf of the United Nations, which saw the death of more than 50 eternal heroes. We understand what gratitude is in Ukraine, and we also understand what it means to give gifts. We are giving the gift of liberty and freedom and sovereignty to people across the globe. That's all I will say about the comments that came from the Vilnius summit. Speaking also of understanding what people give in Ukraine or people try to take, Interpol is now tracking 25 collaborators who escaped the Kharkiv region and ended up in the European Union. However, according to National Police of Kharkiv, we are on their cases and we look forward to bringing them to justice. No one will escape the rule of law who has taken part in the terrorism and war crimes against the people of Ukraine, including Ukrainian collaborators. We're going to end today with thanking Denmark for their gift of 6 anti-mine drones, which operate both on land and on water. Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov announced this donation from the Denmark government to the people of Ukraine. People say this is a trench war. It's truly a war of landmines. It's truly a war of ordnance. It's truly a war of explosives. And sorry for choking up. When you see your friends injured in landmine explosions, you understand that this is a generational conflict. And you understand that that's why we need all the weapons that we deserve and we must have now in order to carry out the full liberation of Ukraine, a return to the 1991 borders, and the implementation of President Zelensky's 10-point peace plan. Because ultimately, if we're not able to get these weapons and carry out our victory and the plans of our command to achieve our goals, we're going to see more senseless deaths, both among civilians and the military. On that note, thank you for joining in to this live and unscripted official news broadcast from the Territorial Defense Forces media studios in Kyiv. I'm Sergeant Sarah Ashton Cirillo, and